We took the Justice Department position they're now taking against Trump, against Clinton, and they opposed us. This is a week that will go down in infamy with the corrupt Biden Justice Department indictment of President Trump over this documents hoax they ginned up to try to destroy him. You know, the left media and a lot of our friends in the media will focus on the indictment that was issued just a little bit ago. He was indicted in Miami yesterday. The grand jury had mostly been meeting up here in Washington, D.C., but they had to move it down to Miami, evidently, because they had jurisdictional issues here in Washington, D.C., according to reports. And it's an indictment about nothing. And I can't overstate. It would be difficult to overstate. I guess I can always overstate something, but it would be difficult to overstate just how corrupt this process is. Everything that we've been warning about with the Durham investigation, or that Durham report that had confirmed the bias against Trump, infecting the investigations there, the abuse of the Justice Department and the FBI has resulted in this unprecedented attack on representative government, our Republican form of government. And the idea that the Justice Department and the FBI can become fully weaponized and turned into political enforcers for the President of the United States to jail his number one political opponent, if that's allowed to stand and that becomes the norm, we will lose our republic. So this isn't just about Donald Trump. This is about the future of this great country and whether or not we're going to let a political party, frankly, and politicians and deep state operatives take away our right to govern ourselves and take away our civil liberties and the civil liberties of those who we choose to have lead us for political purposes. And I've been highlighting this communist revolutionary approach to governance that has been metastasizing over the last few years. And frankly, this is evidence of it. They have, how is it you figure out, what are the ways, what are the indicia of figuring, of politicized, corrupt indictments? It's a novel application of the law in a way that's never been pursued before. And that's what's happening with President Trump. He is being indicted over the handling of records from his term as president. His records, his White House records. And also go into detail later. There's no good faith basis to challenge him on that. And if they challenge him on that, there are scores of people, not just presidents, who should be challenged and prosecuted and jailed. And it doesn't make it, it doesn't mean two wrongs make a right. It just means that the law has never been understood to apply to the president the way Jack Smith and Merrick Garland, who is ultimately responsible for this, and Biden, either by sins of omission or commission, is also responsible to justify this indictment of President Trump. And I'm going to read you the statement that I issued when I heard about this first yesterday. My team and I came up with this statement on behalf of Judicial Watch. And I'm speaking for you here too, by the way, dear Judicial Watch supporter, and I hope I'm doing a good job of it. This day will go down in infamy. The unprecedented and corrupt indictment of President Trump is built on sand and is a brazen election interference. It is an indictment about nothing. Biden's further transforming of the FBI and Justice Department into political enforcers in order to jail his leading political opponent could lead to the end of our constitutional republic. The indictment has followed years of prosecutorial misconduct, harassment, and abuse, victimizing Trump. Not only is Trump innocent, but he's a crime victim. Joe Biden wants to distract from his own personal corruption and join the ranks of foreign dictators by trying to jail and turn Trump into a political prisoner. Congress should act immediately and do everything possible under the law to undo this attempt to wreck our Republican form of government. Every candidate for public office should also denounce this attack on our elections. Let's hope the courts recognize this sham indictment for what it is and shut it down. In the meantime, Judicial Watch will continue to hold the Biden administration accountable for its role in the worst government corruption scandal in American history, the effort to abuse and destroy President Trump. Now, as you may recall from last week, I don't know if you watched this episode last week, I was a witness in this case. I was called before the grand jury, dragged before the grand jury after they came. The FBI was sent to my house to serve me a subpoena. And I made the argument in the grand jury, and I was harassed because I was making this argument publicly, that there was no there in the targeting of Trump, that prior Judicial Watch experience with this area of law showed that the Justice Department was changing the rules to target Trump. And this is the issue. The issue is the Clinton sock drawer case. And what's so dishonest about this indictment, well, I'll get into the indictment later. The Clinton sock drawer case is the governing case, I would argue, in terms of explaining what Trump did and how it should be analyzed. And many years ago, Judicial Watch, I guess it's 10, 12 years ago now, we had sought records of the Clinton tapes. These were tapes that Clinton had that were given to him of his working as president. So they were presidential tapes, right? Now, he was talking to a foreign leader, he was talking to members of Congress, all sorts of things that presidents do and would be typically presidential records if they were analyzed. But he kept them, right? And we thought they should be taken by the archives. And they told us, no, you can't second guess. And so this is how I described it. And I'm going to give you a fuller recitation of this because I think it's important. This is an historic piece of, this is an infamous but historic indictment. So I want you to know just how dishonest it is because it doesn't mention any of this in the indictment, by the way. The Presidential Records Act, the Constitution's, the President's prerogatives under the Constitution, etc. The Clinton sock drawer case, litigated by Judicial Watch, shows how the Justice Department and the National Archives did an about-face and ignored precedent and their own prior legal positions in targeting Trump over records that he had an unconditional right to have under the Presidential Records Act and the U.S. Constitution. And this is what I had tweeted out. In 2010, Judicial Watch submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to the Clinton Library and Presidential Museum, seeking access to these Clinton audio tapes that I talked about from his time as president. The Obama National Archives, NARA, it's called NARA, National Archives, responded that the audio tapes are personal records and therefore not subject to the Presidential Records Act or FOIA. So what happens is under the Presidential Records Act, the archives takes custody of records designated as presidential records by a president or people that he designates to designate as president to do that work. And then they make them available after a certain period of time under FOIA or the FOIA equivalent under the Presidential Records Act, meaning you can ask for them, and if you don't get them, you can sue. Judicial Watch subsequently sued, as I noted, and requested that the court declare the audio tapes to be presidential records, and because they are not currently in the government's possession, to compel the archives to assume custody and control over them. Doesn't that sound exactly like the Trump case? We took the Justice Department position they're now taking against Trump, against Clinton, and they opposed us. Judge Amy Berman Jackson, who is far, far to the left on the judiciary. She's in the U.S. District Court here in the District of Columbia, so she's a D.C. judge, ruled against us. And in doing so, she explained, and I'm going to quote from the court opinion. Under the statutory scheme established by the Presidential Records Act, the decision to segregate personal materials from presidential records is made by the president during the president's term and in his sole discretion. And then she quotes the law, she gives a citation to the law. If you want to look it up, it's 4 U.S.C. section 2203B. So the archives could not make a classification decision different from the president. I'll say it again. The archives could not make a classification decision different from the president. Since the president is completely entrusted with the management and even the disposal of presidential records during his time in office, it would be difficult for this court to conclude that Congress intended that he would have had less authority to do what he pleases with what he considers to be his personal records. The Presidential Records Act contains no provision obligating or even permitting the archivist, excuse me, I lost my time. I lost my place. I'll start over again. The Presidential Records Act contains no provision obligating or even permitting the archivist to assume control over records that the president categorized and filed separately as personal records. At the conclusion of the president's term, the archivist only assumes responsibility for the presidential record. So that's where the archivist's role ends. Plaintiff contends that its factual allegations about the nature and substance of the audio tapes clearly establishes them to be presidential records, regardless of how they were treated by President Clinton. Well, the court is not so sure. But even if the court were inclined to agree with the plaintiff's reassessment of President Clinton's decision, it would not alter the conclusion that the injury cannot be redressed. The Presidential Records Act does not confer any mandatory or discretionary authority on the archivist to classify records. Under the statute, this responsibility is left solely to the president. While the plaintiff casts this lawsuit as a challenge to a decision made by the National Archives, the Presidential Records Act makes it clear that this is not a decision the archivist can make. And in this particular case, this is not a decision the archivist did make because President Clinton's term ended in 2000, and the tapes were not provided to the archives at that time. He kept them, so there's nothing anyone can do. So this is the background on that case. So when in office, President Clinton enlisted Taylor Branch, who is an historian, to assist him in creating an oral history of his 8 years in office by recording 79 audio tapes that preserve not only President Clinton's thoughts and commentary on contemporaneous events and issues he was facing as president, but in some instances recorded actual events such as presidential conversations. For example, the audio tapes contain the following content. President Clinton contemplating potential changes to his cabinet, including whether to fire the CIA director and whether to nominate Madeleine Albright for the Secretary of State. President Clinton's thoughts and reasoning behind foreign policy decisions such as the United States military involvement in Haiti and the contemplated relaxation of the United States embargo of Cuba. Typically classified, right? Certainly national defense information, which is the new hip phrase. President Clinton's side of telephone conversations with foreign leaders, members of the United States Senate and cabinet secretaries. President Clinton speaking to several members of the United States Senate in which President Clinton attempted to persuade the senators to vote against a specific amendment before the Senate. President Clinton's side of a telephone conversation with Congressman William Natcher of Kentucky, in which President Clinton explained his reasoning for entering into NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, based on technical forecasts that he received during presidential briefings. And President Clinton's side of a telephone conversation with the U.S. Secretary of State, Warren Christopher, who was Secretary of State at the time, concerning a diplomatic impasse over Bosnia. I mean, that was like a war in some, well, I guess it was, depending on when it took place. That was one of Clinton's wars. President Clinton took these audio tapes with him when he left office. He did not turn them over to the National Archives and Records Administration. So, as I note in this description, any indictment alleging unlawful retention of classified or national defense information is at odds with the Presidential Records Act, court precedent, and prior DOJ position and archives position on presidential prerogatives on records. So there's no there. They allege he had records he wasn't supposed to have, when in fact he did have records he was allowed to have, and they were personal to him. And I've reviewed the indictment, and this is my conclusion about the indictment. And I'm going to give it to you in writing, because I think it's important. Of course, the left went crazy when I put this out there, because they only have one way of thinking about this. It's always get Trump, right? The rule of law be danged. I've carefully reviewed the indictment, everyone. And it was an indictment, as I will note, by his political opponents at the Biden Justice Department. And as I've noted, Judicial Watch has over 30 years experience, or nearly 30 years experience, litigating federal and presidential records cases, including, as I noted, the Clinton sock drawer case, which is really, in many ways, the governing analysis here. The document the indictment, dishonestly ignores the U.S. Constitution, the Presidential Records Act, legal precedent, and the DOJ's archives' previous position that White House records a president takes with him when he leaves the White House are presumptively personal and not subject to review by partisan Biden appointees at DOJ or archives. Under the Constitution, federal law, and precedent, none of the documents are currently classified or national defense information that restricts Trump's handling of them. They are all his personal records and frankly should be returned to him. If justice prevails, this indictment won't survive scrutiny by honest constitutionalist judges and will be thrown out. So I looked at this indictment, as I note in this statement, and what they ignore is that the president had rights to these documents. They say there are recordations in 2021 where he suggests, well, this is still classified. Well, he was wrong. It wasn't classified because he had it. He took it with him. It became personal. I mean, how do I know that? Because in one of the court hearings related to this Clinton sock drawer case, Justice Department took the position that if the president has records after he leaves office, they're presumptively personal. Except if you're Trump, right? And on top of that, they concoct and highlight all this alleged obstruction, which looks to me like the president joking around about documents and whether he has to comply. I mean, at one point, this is what they consider to be a smoking gun. Trump and his attorney number one, then discussed what to do with a folder full of the classified records they had found in response to this subpoena, right? And then whether Trump the attorney should bring him to his hotel room and put them in a safe there. During the conversation, Trump made a plucking motion as memorialized by Trump Attorney 1. He made a funny motion as though, well, okay, you don't take them with you to your hotel room. If there's why don't you take them to your hotel room if there's anything really bad in there, like, pluck it out. And that was the motion he made. He didn't say that. That's an obstruction charge? He was joking. And the rest of it is he's complaining about the records and the harassment. And the Justice Department's position is, Jack Smith's position is, if you object, you are obstructing. And of course, that's not the law. And since they had no good faith basis to harass him anyway on these records, there can be really no legitimate obstruction investigation as it is anyway. And so it's now in Miami. It's before Judge Cannon, who was the judge that was sympathetic to some of Trump's complaints about Justice Department overreach when the FBI raid first occurred. And by the way, there's information about the FBI raid that's coming out. A whistleblower has said they broke all the rules to raid his home. It was run out of D.C., and the FBI said they wouldn't do that anymore after the Russia hoax. Well, they did it for Trump again. The raid wasn't run out of the Miami office of the FBI. The folks headquarters and the FBI was running it in D.C., and it was in Florida. I mean, there was something going on with that raid. So here we are. We have this unprecedented situation of our democracy, our constitutional republic. And I know some people get upset when I say the word democracy. It's not a sin to say the word democracy. But, we're a constitutional republic that has democratic features, right? And it's being destabilized by this administration. And because, here in Washington, everyone's like, oh, this is so important. This indictment is very serious. It is serious because they can put him in jail. They want to put him in jail. They want President Trump to campaign from jail. This is an election document. If the Democratic National Committee wrote this, it wouldn't be a surprise to me. For instance, they add statements that Trump made that are completely irrelevant, where he was talking about classified records generally and making other statements. He made a joke about Hillary Clinton being able to keep records, get away with deleting classified records because she had her lawyer do it. And believe it or not, they thought that was a good thing to put in there, as opposed to it highlighting the disparate treatment between Trump and Hillary Clinton, who had records she had no business having. All those laws that I said protected Trump from this type of scrutiny don't protect Hillary, because she doesn't have the authority as president, as Secretary of State, to take classified information like she did. So what's going to happen, as I said, Judicial Watch is going to keep on pushing. Despite them harassing me and Judicial Watch through this grand jury appearance, because I saw up front, I'm a witness to the fact that this is a politicized investigation. It's not just prosecutorial misconduct in step 1, 2. It was prosecutorial misconduct from the moment the Justice Department began harassing Trump in 2022 on this. And it hasn't stopped. For instance, there is a allegation out there, Mr. Nauta, who was I think that's his last name, who was an aide to Trump, who's also been indicted in an abusive way. His lawyer said that one of the lawyers for the Justice Department mentioned the fact that this lawyer was angling for a judicial appointment here in D.C. And the lawyer was outraged. He's like, well, why are you saying that? Are you dangling the prospect of a judicial appointment in a legal matter in order to get the lawyer's client to cooperate? What is going on? Now, what should be done? As I said, Biden should shut it down. He won't. The Justice Department can be shut down by Congress, more or less. This investigation can be shut down, and the courts can shut it down. And you can be sure that Judicial Watch will continue its already numerous FOIA lawsuits to uncover this corruption targeting Trump, specifically on this records issue. And we'll file more lawsuits, if necessary, on more topics as we investigate this further. And I can tell you, because I'm a witness, that this investigation is corrupt. I saw it firsthand during my grand jury testimony. I saw it firsthand through the way I was treated. And now I see the way Trump is being treated here. So pray for President Trump. Pray for our country. This indictment's about nothing. They want to jail Trump for the rest of his life. I mean, some of these charges are 20, you can face 20 years per charge, it looks like. So there's like 36 documents, and so each document is a count. Each count is 20 years. So I don't know, is it 20 times 33? Or 36 or whatever? I mean, they want to jail Trump for the rest of his life over a document hoax. And it is a hoax. So I know you're all upset about it. I'm upset. I'm upset personally. I know Trump a little bit. And I don't want to see any American citizen harmed, but certainly someone you know. But all we can do is what we can do, right? So Judicial Watch will continue to do its work educating the American people, even though the Justice Department tries to scare us from doing it and retaliating against us and trying to intimidate me directly. And you should demand that Congress do everything it can to shut this down. And frankly, if there are other candidates who you like running against Trump, that's their prerogative and that's your prerogative to support them. But, to me, anyone running for public office should say no. Because if it's not Trump, it will be them. That's for sure. So there's that political component. But patriots should all be concerned about this destruction of our justice system by these partisan ideologues running the Justice Department. And I think the Justice Department should be subject to a significant impeachment inquiry targeting Garland and other officials who made these decisions. And to the degree Biden's White House was involved in this abuse of Trump, the inquiry should include their actions as well, including the president's. This is a battle for the future of our country. And if you have people who are engaged, what I would consider to be in a seditious conspiracy against our Republican form of government by abusing the powers entrusted to them to jail citizens that they know are innocent or shouldn't be prosecuted, then they should be confronted with all the tools available to us under the Constitution, whether it be through congressional powers, through complaints within the executive branch, who knows, maybe something will come there, and through the judicial branch as well. And of course, Judicial Watch will continue to conduct its independent oversight on the outside. So, you know, Jack Smith is going to be a lot in the news a lot these days, as I highlighted last week. They don't want us to know the names of anyone who's working for them. I guess some names will become more public now that the indictment's proceeding, but they're hiding all these names. Why? Because I guarantee you they're all Democrats or leftists who are supporting Democratic candidates who have a record of being anti-Trump. Otherwise, people wouldn't, otherwise, no ethical person who didn't have a political axe to grind would sign on to this indictment. No one would sign on to this indictment if they were honest in the Justice Department. So you can presume people who approved this indictment did it for political, corrupt reasons. And that's why we want to expose it, the names of those involved, because we have a right to the names under law, and there's no right to withhold them. So despite the effort to intimidate Judicial Watch, we're pushing hard for more information on this abuse. And, you know, and of course, the other big story out there, which of course is something I'm not focusing on, I guess I've fallen into the left's trap, right? We had more information come out, further confirmation of this bribery allegation involving Burisma and Ukraine and millions of dollars with Vice President Biden, or then Vice President Biden. And Comey has pulled back from contempt for Ray, because Ray, I guess, has made the document more readily available than it previously has been. But I still don't understand why there's no contempt, because I don't believe that the subpoena has been followed through on or complied with as it should have been. But that's my own approach, because we still don't have the document. You can be sure the Judicial Watch is going to be suing for this document about this bribery involving Joe Biden. And one way to guarantee that Joe Biden is never indicted, his family is never seriously analyzed, is, besides having corrupt people who are willing to look the other way, is to have the Justice Department do nothing but target Trump. So that way there's nothing else they can do in terms of having another significant investigation. And that's what's happening with the Biden crime family. So we won't be distracted by that. We've got lawsuit after lawsuit investigating these allegations concerning Joe Biden. We've uncovered key documents already about it, and more are coming. So we will always keep our eyes on the ball, even though there's numerous balls on the field. We're always going to be focused on what we need to do to get the most significant truths out about what your government is up to. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.